From ancient Greece to artificial intelligence, approximately 600 BC to 21st century, over 2,600 years, humanity kept asking only a handful of truly important questions. Who am I? What is truth? How should I live? And, is any of this meaningless? Different people in different eras answered very differently. Some brilliantly, some strangely, some so strangely it circles back to brilliance. This book distills their ideas without the padding and without the 300 pages, just the essence. 1. Ancient Greece, approximately 600 to 300 BC, approximately 624 to 546 BC. Thales of Miletus, the first philosopher. Thales was the first person to say, "We do not need the stories of gods. Reason alone is enough to explain the world." His answer was naive, everything is made of water, but the question was revolutionary. For the first time in human history, someone tried to understand the world without supernatural forces. This was the true birth of science and philosophy. Water is the beginning of all things, approximately 470 to 399 BC. Socrates, the man killed by questions. Socrates never wrote a single word, and became one of the most influential thinkers in history. His method was simple. Ask questions until the other person realizes they actually know nothing. The Athenians called it arrogance. Socrates called it help. He was eventually sentenced to death for corrupting the youth, essentially for teaching people to question things, a rare idea still worth dying for. I know that I know nothing, approximately 428 to 348 BC. Plato, the philosopher of caves and shadows. Plato's most famous image is the allegory of the cave. Imagine people chained to a wall inside a cave, seeing only shadows on the wall and believing those shadows are reality. Plato said, "That is all of us. The real world is not what we see. It is made of perfect, invisible forms. The tree you see is merely an imperfect copy of the ideal form of tree." It sounds like a philosophical chess game, but this idea shaped all of Western thought and Christianity. The beginning of wisdom is the discovery of our own ignorance. 384 to 322 BC. Aristotle, the man who wanted to know everything. If Plato looked to the heavens, Aristotle looked at the earth. He classified plants, animals, political systems, poetics, logic, and ethics, and in most fields his ideas dominated for 2,000 years. His key ethical insight, happiness, eudaimonia, is not pleasure or wealth. It is living according to your nature and potential. In other words, if you are a musician who never plays, you will not be happy no matter what else you have. We are what we repeatedly do. Excellence, then, is not an act, but a habit. 2. Eastern wisdom, approximately 500 BC to 6th century AD, approximately 563 to 483 BC. Siddhartha Gautama, Buddha, the prince who became enlightened. Buddha was a prince who one day walked out through the palace gates and for the first time saw illness, old age, and death. That encounter shook him to his core. After years of meditation under a fig tree, he formulated the Four Noble Truths. Life is suffering. The cause of suffering is desire. Liberation is possible. There is a path to it. This is not pessimism. It is diagnosis and prescription in one. Buddhism is more popular in the West today than ever, and its ideas about mindfulness have been confirmed by neuroscience. The mind is everything. What you think, you become. 551 to 479 BC. Confucius, the architect of ethics and order. Confucius lived in chaotic times and spent his whole life seeking an answer to one question: how do you build a good society? His answer was not through revolution or religion, but through relationships and self-improvement. The central principle is Ren, humaneness, goodness. If every person respects parents, rulers, and neighbors, society will be harmonious. A simple recipe, hard to follow. Confucianism still shapes Asian culture to this day. Do not impose on others what you yourself do not want. 6th to 4th century BC. Laozi. The Tao, a path you can only feel. The Tao Te Ching is one of the shortest and most mysterious books in the history of philosophy, only 5,000 characters. Laozi taught Wu Wei, the principle of non-action or natural action. Water does not fight a stone, it flows around it. Victory comes not through force, but through flexibility. The highest leader is one about whom people say, "We did this ourselves." These ideas should not be confused with laziness. This is the most subtle philosophy of leadership yet to appear in any management textbook. The Tao that can be named is not the eternal Tao. 3. Hellenism and Rome, approximately 300 BC to 200 AD, approximately 341 to 270 BC. Epicurus, not a hedonist, just loved tranquility. The word Epicureanism today implies a lover of pleasures, but Epicurus himself understood pleasure very modestly. The highest good for him was ataraxia, peace of mind, freedom from fear and suffering. His recipe? Live simply, have good friends, avoid politics, do not fear death. The irony: his philosophy was radically calm and simple, yet it was considered scandalous in his time. Death is nothing to us. When we exist, death is not present. When death is present, we no longer exist. Approximately 50 AD. Epictetus, a slave who mastered freedom. Epictetus was a slave and became one of the most liberated philosophers in history. His central idea? There are things we can control, thoughts, reactions, values, and things we cannot: body, wealth, other people, time. Happiness depends on the former, and only on the former. This simple distinction is today the foundation of cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, and a daily life principle for millions of people around the world. Do not trouble yourself over what you cannot change. Change what you can. 121 to 180 AD. Marcus Aurelius, the emperor who wrote to himself. Marcus Aurelius ruled the greatest empire of his time and kept a private journal, written for himself, not for others. That journal became the book Meditations, one of the most widely read philosophical works of all time. His thoughts on patience, duty, and the transient nature of all things sound remarkably modern. The interesting part: holding absolute power, he wrote about humility and self-discipline. The most powerful man in the world was fighting against himself, not against enemies. Nothing will stop you from living according to your nature, except yourself. 4. The Middle Ages and Renaissance, 400 to 1600. 354 to 430 AD. Augustine of Hippo. 1. Searched everywhere, found it within. Augustine was one of the first thinkers to write a true autobiography, the Confessions. He tried pleasure, philosophy, and Manichaeism, and only Christianity gave him answers. His key idea? The human heart is restless until it rests in God. This was the first step toward Western individualism, the idea that inner life is important and worth exploring. Our heart is restless until it finds its rest in Thee. 1469 to 1527. Niccolo Machiavelli, the philosopher. Everyone denies. Reading The Prince is perhaps the most scandalous political book in history. Machiavelli answered one question: how do you stay in power? His answer was shockingly candid. Sometimes you must lie, manipulate, and be cruel. He did not care what a ruler should be. He described what rulers actually are. It was the first truly scientific study of politics. Machiavellian tactics are used today in politics, business, and sports arenas around the world. It is better to be feared than loved, if you cannot be both. 5. The Age of Enlightenment, 1600 to 1800. 1596 to 1650. René Descartes demolished everything and started over. Descartes decided, I want to know what is truly real. He began doubting everything, senses, memories, even whether the world exists at all. Perhaps some evil demon was deceiving him. But there was one thing he could not doubt, the very fact that he was doubting. I think, therefore I am. This single sentence became the foundation of modern science and philosophy. The idea that certainty must begin with the individual mind, not with tradition or authority. Descartes essentially invented modern self-awareness. Cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. 1711 to 1776. David Hume destroyed the concept of cause and effect. Hume asked an uncomfortable question. How do you know the sun will rise tomorrow? We have seen it thousands of times, but that does not guarantee it always will. We do not observe the link between cause and effect. We insert it ourselves. This shocked everyone, especially Kant, who said Hume woke him from his dogmatic slumber. Hume also stated clearly, from facts about what is, you cannot directly derive conclusions about what ought to be. This problem remains very much alive today. Reason is, and ought only to be, the slave of the passions. 1724 to 1804. Immanuel Kant. Lived by the clock, thought about the universe. Kant never traveled more than 60 miles from his birthplace of Königsberg, yet his mind went further than any of his contemporaries. His categorical imperative is one of the most elegant principles in ethics. Act only according to a rule you could will to become a universal law. Before doing something, ask, what if everyone did this? His other great breakthrough, time and space are not properties of the world, they are structures of our mind. We do not discover order in the world, we impose it. Two things fill me with wonder, the starry sky above me and the moral law within me. 6. The 19th century. God is dead and other news. 1800 to 1900. 1818 to 1883. Karl Marx, the philosopher turned into an ideology. Marx wanted not just to understand the world, but to change it. His diagnosis? Capitalism systematically exploits workers, and all culture, law, and religion is merely a superstructure protecting the interests of the wealthy. Religion is the opium of the people. History is the history of class struggle. His ideas were used, and distorted, for revolutions that killed millions. That does not mean his analysis of inequality was wrong. The remedy simply turned out to be worse than the disease. Philosophers have only interpreted the world. The point, however, is to change it. 1844 to 1900. Friedrich Nietzsche. Diagnosed a culture, then lost his mind. God is dead is Nietzsche's most famous phrase, and his most misunderstood. He was not a joyful atheist. He argued that Western culture had lost its primary source of values and had not yet grasped what that meant, like pulling the floor from beneath yourself without realizing you are about to fall. His solution? The Übermensch. Not a race or a force, but a person who creates their own values independently of religious or social norms. Nietzsche ended his life in a psychiatric hospital. His ideas ended up reshaping Western civilization for generations. That which does not kill us makes us stronger. 1856 to 1939. Sigmund Freud. Discovered the unconscious and blamed his mother. Freud argued that most of our behavior does not come from conscious decisions, but from the unconscious, shaped in childhood and filled with repressed desires, traumas, and fears. The Oedipus complex, defense mechanisms, dream analysis, all his ideas. The scientific community debates the validity of most of his theories, but the cultural influence is undeniable. He convinced the West that inner life is complex, important, and worth exploring. A person is rarely completely honest, even with themselves. 7. The 20th century, existence and meaning, 1900 to 1970. 1879 to 1955. Albert Einstein tried to read the mind of God. Einstein was not just a scientist, he was a philosopher-scientist. His theory of relativity overturned Newton's mechanical world. Time and space are not fixed. They bend, stretch, and depend on the observer. Mass curves space-time, and what we call gravity is simply curved geometry. He famously said, "God does not play dice," pushing back against quantum mechanics. And quantum mechanics replied, "He does." This argument remains unresolved to this day. Imagination is more important than knowledge. 1905 to 1980. Jean-Paul Sartre. Existence before essence. Sartre turned traditional philosophy upside down. Tradition said humans have a pre-given nature or essence. Sartre said we first exist, then create ourselves. Existence precedes essence. There is no predetermined human purpose. Every person is free and forced to choose. Freedom in Sartre's philosophy is not a gift. It is a heavy burden. Humans are condemned to be free. From this arises responsibility and anxiety. Existence precedes essence. We are what we choose to be. 1913 to 1960. Albert Camus. Sisyphus is happy. Camus asked the simplest and hardest question. If life is meaningless, is it worth living? His answer? The philosophy of the absurd. Life truly has no inherent meaning, and that is fine, because it means we can live without illusions, with complete freedom. The myth of Sisyphus, condemned by the gods to roll a boulder up a hill only for it to roll back down forever. Camus says we must imagine Sisyphus happy, not because his work is meaningful, but in spite of the fact that it is not. One must imagine Sisyphus happy. 1875 to 1961. Carl Jung. Archetypes, shadows, and the collective unconscious. Jung began as Freud's student but quickly found his own path. Where Freud focused on the personal unconscious, Jung postulated the collective unconscious, a shared layer of symbols and archetypes belonging to all of humanity. The animus, anima, shadow, fool, hero. These archetypes appear in the myths, dreams, and fairy tales of every culture on Earth. Jung was interested in individuation, the process by which a person integrates all their parts and becomes truly themselves. It sounds vague, and yet it is one of the most influential ideas in 21st century psychology. He who does not examine his own shadow projects it onto others. 8. The 21st century, AI and the new questions, 1990 to today, 1942 to 2018. Stephen Hawking. Black holes and humanity's timeline. Hawking lived in a body he could control only with his eyes, and thought about the origin of the universe. He showed that black holes slowly evaporate, the first step toward unifying quantum mechanics and general relativity. But perhaps his most important contribution was not physics, but a warning. Artificial intelligence could become the most dangerous thing humanity has ever created, or the most beneficial. The difference will depend entirely on how we build it. Intelligence is the ability to adapt to change. B. 1976. Yuval Noah Harari. Sapiens, Homo Deus, and Questions Without Answers. Harari is today perhaps the most influential popular philosopher. His thesis, Homo sapiens dominates the world not through strength or intelligence, but through the unique ability to create and believe in fictional stories, nations, money, religions, corporations. What we call reality is largely shared fantasy. Now, he argues, we are approaching a moment when humanity can, for the first time, consciously revise human nature itself through biotechnology and artificial intelligence. Homo sapiens rules the world because it is the only animal that can believe in things that exist purely in its own imagination. The 2020s and beyond. Artificial intelligence, the new philosophical question. For the first time in history, humanity has created an entity that can speak, reason, and create, but we do not know whether it feels anything. This opens questions that Socrates, Plato, or Kant could never have imagined. What is consciousness? Can it arise in a machine? Must suffering occur in a biological substrate to be real? Can algorithms have rights? These are not science fiction. They are being decided right now in laboratories, parliaments, and conference rooms. Philosophy has returned to the center of everything. For the first time, philosophical questions about consciousness and free will are engineering problems, instead of an ending. Over 2,600 years, humanity kept changing its answers, but the questions stayed the same. Who am I? How do I live well? Does life have meaning? The difference between Socrates and Sartre is not in the questions, but in the era and the context. And there is something genuinely comforting about that. No matter how technologically advanced a civilization becomes, the human questions never go away. Perhaps that is the whole point, not to find the final answer, but to never be afraid to ask.